Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Let's begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us, and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. Okay, all the quotes today will be by Thich Nhat Hanh, a precious soul if there ever was one. And not all of them are specifically relevant to our topic today, which is, as I've been telling you for the past couple of weeks, the power of life and death, a spiritual perspective on abortion. Not all the quotes will have anything to do with that except the last one. And as I told you last week, this week will deal with our free will and our freedom of choice, the freedom of choice that we are given by God during our journey, our human journey here on earth. Now, actually sitting down and writing out my thoughts about this topic was a little bit more difficult than I thought that it would be. It is an extremely complex and emotional topic, and the following is my personal opinion based on my study, my thought, my meditation, my experience, and by sharing it, I hope that it might help someone form their own opinion about the subject if that's what they're needing to do. But you are certainly free to form your own opinion about it. So, on to our quotes. The first one, to love in the true sense of the word is to feel no discrimination. We should have the element of equanimity so that we can love without boundaries. Next, we live in a time when meditation is no longer just an individual practice. We have to practice together as a community, as a nation, as a planet. If we really want peace to be possible, then we should try to look at reality in such a way that there is no separation. Next, our only job is to remain open. Usually, when we hear or read something new, we just compare it to our own ideas. If it is the same, we accept it and say it is correct. If it is not, we say it is incorrect. In either case, we learn nothing. I love that one. It is so important to remain open-minded. If you're only agreeing with what you already believe is true and you are labeling everything else as incorrect, you are learning nothing. And if you're not learning, you're not growing. And when you stop growing, you start dying. So it's pretty vital to remain open to new ideas. And our last quote is, I have arrived. I am home in the here and now. I am solid. I am free. In the ultimate, I dwell. I love that. In the ultimate, I dwell. What does that mean? Especially in relation to our personal freedom, the greatest example of which is our freedom to choose, to make choices over our own lives, including our physical bodies. The definition of the word ultimate is being or happening at the end of a process, final, as in when you say, this is my final word, or this is my final decision, this is my final answer. A secondary definition is the best achievable or imaginable of its kind, as in this is the ultimate vacation, or the ultimate day, or the ultimate experience, or the ultimate meal. That first definition reminds me of a phrase that was the slogan of sorts of our 33rd president, Harry Truman, who famously had a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here," which means I am the one who is responsible to make the final decision. I will not pass my responsibility off to someone else, which is known as passing the buck. So he referred to this slogan several times in formal speeches of his, once in his farewell address as president, when he said, "It's easy for the Monday morning quarterback to say what the coach should have done after the game is over. But when a decision is before you, it has to be made." And he is, of course, emphasizing that hindsight is 2020. It's fairly easy to look back after the fact and see how things might have been done differently or better. But in the heat of the moment, especially when there is a deadline looming, someone has to have the final say and make the decision and be willing to be responsible for that decision and its consequences. If you remember your history, you'll know that Harry Truman was president during World War II and was the one who made the decision to drop atomic bombs on two cities in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, most innocent civilians, but effectively ended the war, which, if allowed to continue, would have potentially killed many, many more people and gone on for many more years. So although the deaths and destruction and devastation caused by this action were horrendous and unfortunate, Harry Truman is largely regarded as a hero for making the decision that he did as it related to the bigger picture of what was going on in the world at that time, even though it is a decision that resulted in the killing of human beings. So when people who are staunchly anti-abortion cite the commandment in the Bible, "Thou shalt not kill," as the basis for their stance on this issue, I wonder if those same people are also staunchly anti-war, because war kills millions of people, yet that kind of killing, in some cases, not all, is viewed as patriotic and even heroic. So let's look at that angle of it for a moment, shall we? One of the most moving and powerful scenes in a movie that I've ever seen is in the movie Amistad, part of which recounts the journey so many Africans made across the ocean in slave ships. The scene is of these people who had been hunted and caught like animals, and they're being herded on to one of these ships. Not speaking any English, many of them are confused, and it's taking them a few minutes to process exactly what's happening to them. And in the course of this scene, the camera shot cuts to a young woman holding an infant to her chest, fear in her eyes, and the actress, whoever it was, did such a wonderful job of showing by the expressions on her face the exact moment that she realized what was happening. She was on the upper deck of the ship being moved along with the rest of the people, and when she got to the place where she could look and see down into the belly of the ship, she got a glimpse of what her future was going to be, and not only hers, but also her baby's. Once down on the lower deck, she saw that people were being shackled hand and foot and chained together, lying helpless, packed in like sardines for the trip to America. And although this young mother might not have been fully able to grasp the concept of slavery or what was awaiting her at the end of this journey, she knew that it wasn't going to be anything good, and that she needed to get away, to escape, if at all possible, by any means necessary. So she just very quietly started inching her way through the throng of people over to the side of the ship. And when she reached the railing, she turned her back to it, kissed her baby, looked up at the sky as if to God, and closed her eyes and just fell backwards into the water along with her child. She made the decision to die and to kill her baby as well, rather than meet the destiny that would have been their fate, which we as the audience sitting there in the movie knew would have been a life of slavery. I remember crying so hard when I saw that and thinking what tremendous courage it took for her to do that, to make that decision, and how many other women have had to make that decision over the course of history. A lot of people who consider themselves patriots will repeat this phrase: "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees." meaning, of course, that they would choose to die fighting for their freedom and the right to live freely over continuing to live but as a slave. People are also fond of quoting Patrick Henry when he said, "Give me liberty or give me death," when he was urging the people of the then colony of Virginia to fight in the Revolutionary War against England in order to establish America as a sovereign nation. The full quote is actually, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, it's kind of ironic that he uses the terms chains and slavery to describe what the American colonies were being subjected to, living under the king and the laws of England. It was not literal slavery. What he was talking about was metaphorical slavery, mental slavery, religious slavery, financial slavery and servitude, the inability to make our own laws, govern ourselves, and make decisions as a separate country. The irony, though, being that at that time, actual slavery was going on in what was soon to become the United States. And apparently, most of the people who wanted to revolt against King George and England for enslaving them were absolutely fine with literally enslaving black people. But I digress. Back to my point. So there's this general sense that killing in the name of freedom, the freedom to live as you choose without being enslaved, even if it's metaphorically, is patriotic even, and sometimes noble or heroic. But there's a bit of a double standard, I am afraid, between men, soldiers, and politicians making this decision and taking responsibility for it in the name of the greater good and for the sake of their own freedom and for the right to make their own choices about how they will live their lives. And when women make that same decision to end a life in order to avoid a life of metaphorical slavery, which many of them know will be the outcome if they have a child at a time when they are not prepared or equipped to do so, or as the result of a particular situation that they cannot accept. One example of which is rape, but there are many other valid reasons why a woman cannot accept the conditions under which she got pregnant. I'm sure we've all seen plenty of scenes in movies where what's known as a mercy killing is performed on the battlefield, where one man kills not his enemy, but his fellow soldier when that soldier's death is imminent and he's in a lot of pain. It's considered merciful to put someone out of their misery a little more quickly. Some of you might also remember the movie from the 1970s, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was set in a mental institution where the patients were being abused both physically and psychologically, and some of them were there for the wrong reasons and against their will. Two of the men had decided to escape and had hatched a plan to do so, but they got to one of them before they could get out and gave him a lobotomy, which was a common practice up until, I guess, the 50s and 60s. I think where a person's frontal lobes are removed, rendering them a vegetable, basically, living in a comatose or a catatonic state for the rest of their lives. And so when his buddy realized what they had done to him, instead of leaving him there like that, he put a pillow over his face and smothered him before he broke the window and made his own escape. Most people who have seen that movie understand that to be an act of mercy, even a kindness. So it's not that we don't understand that in some cases, taking the life of another is the best possible solution available at the moment. But for some reason, a certain segment of our society has decided this does not apply to abortion, and they can't ever envision a scenario where it would be appropriate. They believe that they are speaking on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, and there's some truth to that. Babies, most especially before they're born, don't know and can't advocate for themselves. The question is, whose responsibility is it then to be their voice and to make decisions on their behalf. I would argue that it's their parents, and the government agrees with me, except for that one crucial first decision that is taken out of the parents' hands, or soon will be if the anti-abortion activists are successful in overturning what has been the law now for almost 50 years. So let's talk about that for a minute. Everything else the state or government holds parents responsible for. Until they reach a certain age, children cannot care for themselves and should not be allowed to make decisions for themselves because they are neither mentally or emotionally or physically capable of doing so. Therefore, the government holds the parents responsible. We have laws in place that say you can't leave children at a certain age unattended. That's considered negligence. Legally, parents are responsible for providing the basic necessities of life, which at the very least are food, shelter, and clothing for children until they are 18 years old. So we understand that children up to a certain age do not have personal agency or sovereignty. And we penalize parents for not making certain decisions concerning the welfare of their children. For instance, if you decide not to send your child to school, to go to public school or private school, or to school him at home, then you can go to jail. That's a crime. You cannot put your child in a dangerous situation. You as the parent are responsible and held accountable by the state for a whole host of decisions that affect the quality of your child's life, except, like I said, perhaps the most important one. My point is, parents are expected and even demanded to be the voice for their own child and to advocate for their welfare. But if it goes the way it's looking like it will go, they will not be free to decide if they want to take on that responsibility. And if the voice they decide to use on behalf of their child before it's born is one you disagree with, all of a sudden you decide you'll be the voice for the child instead of their parents. You decide it's your responsibility. And of course, I'm talking still now about people that are staunchly anti-abortion. A lot of those same people do a lot of talking about parents know what's best for their child and making decisions about what they can and can't learn in school and whether or not they should be vaccinated or wear masks, until it comes to the ultimate decision of whether to be born or not. For some reason, then the parents, according to these people, no longer know best. These are people who are very concerned about giving every child a chance at life, the opportunity to be born, but they're not so concerned about what his or her life will be like once the baby is here. I'm going to read you now one of the best and most insightful statements I've ever heard about this specific aspect of this debate, and it's by a Methodist pastor named David Barnhart. He says, "The unborn are a convenient group to advocate for. They never make demands of you, and they are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you are not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money or education or food or childcare. Unlike immigrants, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without having to work at creating or maintaining a relationship with them. Because as soon as they're born, you can forget about them, because then they cease to be the unborn. You see, you can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. They are, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus and forgotten about in favor of the unborn." Wow. Why? Because it's easier. That is quite an indictment but it is so very true. In my opinion, if you have anything at all to say about someone else making the decision not to bring a child into the world, but you're not a foster parent or an adoptive parent, or give substantially either your time, your money, or both to organizations who take care of kids who have no parents, then all you're doing by taking that stance is making yourself feel better and exhibiting your self-righteousness. You are doing nothing for children, born or unborn. In other words, put your money, your time, your love, your home where your mouth is, or close it, and let people make their own decisions about their own lives. Okay, so that's kind of the practical, moral, I just invented a new word. The practical, moral, and ethical side of it, in my opinion. So what about the spiritual and or metaphysical aspects of this issue? Let's go there for a minute. I mentioned a few weeks ago that it was Bishop Carlton Pearson's Mother's Day message on sacred motherhood that started me thinking about this. So I want to bring that piece in now. I'll start, though, with a short excerpt from Andrew Martin first. He says, "The essence of any spiritual journey is simply coming into resonance with yourself, really getting to know yourself and becoming the keeper of yourself, your whole self, masculine and feminine. Masculine represents the head and thinking. Feminine represents the heart and feeling." Now, I'm adding this part here. One is not superior to the other per se, although personally, I believe one should be considered the leader. And as most of you know by now, for me, that's always going to be the heart. Always, always, always. It's not that we don't need the masculine or the mind, but when we're talking about getting to know your whole self, which includes both masculine and feminine, we've been way out of balance, leaning toward the masculine for a long time now. Bishop Pearson spoke about this when he said this in his sermon that I'm referring to. He said, "In the very opening chapters of the Bible, we are given a bad opinion of females because the way the Hebrew Bible is written makes it seem as if God is judging and punishing Eve." He further said that all throughout the holy book we know as the Bible are the seeds of racism, elitism, arrogance, and misogyny. But what is the truth? He went on to say that while Adam was concerned with obeying God, Eve desired to be like God. The story says the serpent told her that if she ate of the fruit, her eyes would be opened and she would be like God. Now, she may not have gone about it in exactly the right way, but her desire, I believe, was pure. She wanted to be like God. She just didn't realize the level of responsibility that came along with that power and with that knowledge. So let's draw a little comparison here to a couple of things we've already mentioned. Adam would have been the equivalent of the loyalist who wanted to just keep obeying the King of England and not have to take on the responsibility of forging for themselves a new sovereign nation. It was easier for them to remain in a position where every decision was made for them and all they had to do was obey. Adam passed the buck, as it were. Eve, on the other hand, was the equivalent of the revolutionaries who said, "I want to make my own decisions and live by my own laws." Now again, as I just said, she might not have fully understood that in order to do that, she also had to assume the responsibility and the consequences of her actions. She had to be willing to say, as President Truman did, "The buck stops here. I will make this decision and I will deal with whatever the fallout is." And so when you look at it that way, it's not really a matter of right or wrong. It's just a question of what level of consciousness you want to live on. Do you want to recognize and realize the divinity within you and become the keeper of your whole self, as we just heard from Andrew Martin? Or do you want to always be looking to an external source for your answers and for your direction? Eve, according to Bishop Pearson's interpretation, wanted to be like God. And what have we been learning about God for quite some time now? that God is more than just good. God is all. We say it all the time. Light is incomplete without darkness. Male is incomplete without female. And life is incomplete without death, or at least our human concept of it. As I said last week, life is eternal and has no opposite. It's actually birth and death that are opposite events in your life. But as we understand it here in our finite earthly existence, life, or being physically alive in a body, is the opposite of death. And as concepts, one is incomplete without the other, which is why I did the teaching last week about death in preparation for today. The Bible says the power of life and death is in your tongue, or in what you say. It's yours to command. But we only want to focus on the power of life, the power to give life, to create life, to birth life. However, in order to have completion and to keep balance in the universe, that means we also have to have power over death. We must. Why would we be given power over one and not the other? Why would that statement in the Bible even include the word death if the power over it were not also at our disposal, just like the power of life? Now, this is pretty deep, but stay with me here. Why are we comfortable with someone having the power or the ability to raise someone from the dead or to command their spirit back into their body? If that were to happen, it has happened before, we consider that a miracle. But we're not comfortable with them having or using that same power to release someone's spirit from their body if that's what's necessary. There is a Hindu goddess named Kali, and she is usually depicted as having 4 arms. And what those arms represent, or what is said of her, is that she is the ultimate mother. In fact, her full name is Kali Ma. So with these 2 arms on this side, she creates, and with these 2 arms on the other side, she destroys. Equal power over both. So see, what the Hindus understand that a little bit better than Christians sometimes is the balance that must be kept in the universe and in the metaphysical world. If an entity is truly a god or a goddess, they would never have only the power to create or only the power to destroy. In order to be all like God, they must have both. So if we are like God, we must have both. But we're afraid of that because, frankly, we don't want the responsibility that comes with it. I read something the other day that a woman was writing about Kali, and she was talking about the fact that Kali destroys with precision. There is no collateral damage. She only destroys what needs to be destroyed. She doesn't destroy for fun or because she's bloodthirsty or just for the sake of destruction. It has a purpose, a higher purpose. Kali's destruction is always for the greater good. As I said earlier, Kali is considered the great mother. And mothers can be fierce. Mothers are often thought of as sweet and loving, meek and mild. The law of kindness is in her tongue. But there's also a fierceness to a mother's love. Try going up and touching a little baby tiger cub and see what happens. You'll get the wrong end of that mother fierceness. Mothers protect, and sometimes they protect by destroying. As odd as that sounds, it is the truth. Let me give you a personal example from nature. A few months ago, my Aunt Darlene, who lives down the street from us, called and said that a mama cat had a litter of kittens in her backyard under a bush, and she was worried about them because it was very cold and rainy. It was the end of January. So my son and daughter-in-law went down, and by the time they got there, the mama cat had come and gotten 2 of the kittens out from under the bush and taken them somewhere else. But there was a 3rd one under there, and they waited for a little bit until it became obvious that she wasn't coming back for it. So they brought it home, and we nursed it back to health, and she has now become a part of our family. And as the weeks went on, a couple of other things became obvious. Even though they're feral, the mama cat and the 2 other kittens still hang around my Aunt Darlene's backyard because she leaves food out for them. So she and I both, when I've been down there, have had the opportunity to observe them. And she and I both have also seen our little kitten, the one we brought home. And even though you'd think that the one who got brought in out of the elements, out of the cold weather, and was basically taken care of like a baby, would have fared the best. But she's actually much smaller than both of her siblings, and she's had quite a few physical issues. One of her ears has fallen off. The entire ear just went limp and then hardened up and fell off, as well as the tip of her tail. When I took her to the vet, she said she'd never seen anything like that in a kitten, only in older cats whose circulation had become poor. So she's struggled, and with our love and our help, she's made it. But she was obviously the runt, and she obviously had some genetic issues at the very beginning of life with which she was born. And because nature is so amazing, that's why we call it Mother Nature, the mama cat knew that. Instinctively, she knew something wasn't quite right with that kitten, and that's why she didn't come back for it. Now, that seems very cruel to our human sensibilities, but that's how nature works sometimes. Sometimes mothers instinctively know when a little life is not going to be viable. Sometimes women have miscarriages. Those are also known as spontaneous abortions. And again, I'm not making any judgment about the rightness or the wrongness of any of it. Our children who are born with what we would consider abnormalities not worthy of life, of course they are. That's not what I'm saying at all. And who's to say what's normal anyway? That is way above our pay grade. There are millions of children who have overcome all manner of physical issues and have had wonderful lives. But there are also those who sadly don't make it. Everybody's on a different journey, and each of our journeys is unique to us. And we get to decide what that journey will be, if we take the responsibility for it. Some people's purpose and journey is to arrive here disadvantaged in some way so that they can learn how to persevere and overcome. And because that's true, it's also got to be true that it's some other people's journey to be the parents of those children. But it is always our choice, or God wouldn't have given us free will. That would have been cruel of him to give us free will and then not allow us to use it. And when some people are presented with that particular journey, they may or may not choose to take it. What someone chooses as their journey is none of anyone else's business. Are there cases where a mother has gone ahead and had a child that she didn't plan on and maybe didn't even want at first, and then have that experience end up changing her life for the better and be the best experience be the best thing that ever happened to her? Of course, yes, it happens all the time. But there are also many cases that don't work out quite that well. And again, I go back to the basic premise that everyone is on their own individual journey, and it's really not our job to judge them or their journey or their choices. So speaking of choices, what about the child's choice? As I said, we're going to go really deep now and talk about some metaphysical aspects of this issue. If we believe, as I do, that our spirit makes the choice to incarnate and that we get to choose things like who our parents will be, what our race is, what our gender is, where we're born. I'm not really sure how specific it gets, but I do believe we have a certain amount of choice when we decide to come here and have a human experience. If we believe that, then I can see where it's possible from that point of view to see abortion as a little bit of a slap in the face to the child or a rejection. But I like to look at it this way. First, let me back up a second and tell you a story. As you know, for 25 years, I was the head of the children's ministry here. And during that time, I dealt with a lot of parents, all kinds. And this one family in particular was interesting to me. They literally had 8 or 9 kids when they started coming to church, and she was pregnant again. But the thing is, she was always complaining that they didn't have this and they didn't have that. And she stopped me in the hallway at church one Sunday and asked me to pray for her right there, that God would send her a full-time nanny so she could go to law school. And I couldn't help but gently ask her why she had decided to have so many children if her goal was to go to law school, and why she thought it was God's responsibility to send her a nanny to take care of the kids she had decided to have. And she said to me, "Oh, I didn't decide to have any of these kids. God's in charge of my womb, and I guess he'll close it when he's done." So thankfully, I was able to stifle the next comment that came into my head, which was going to be in the form of a suggestion for another part of her anatomy which she should close. But seriously, all I could think of was how irresponsible that thought process was. She could barely take care of the kids she had, was having more, and was taking absolutely no responsibility for them being here in the first place, and was wanting everybody in the world to help her and still live her life the way she had planned it. As she saw it, her life as the mother of 10 kids had just happened to her because she was putting all the responsibility on God as she saw him and understood him, being external to her and a being that made decisions for her and over her life. She was not recognizing one bit of her own divinity or expressing or exercising any personal sovereignty or the beautiful God-given gift of her own free will. She had decided, whether she thought she was making a choice or not, she was to go through life as some sort of puppet or as a victim of circumstance. So that's one perspective you can have of life, that it's just your job as a woman to have as many children as God decides to give you because you can, until he closes your womb, and that you have no say in the matter. But if instead you see having a child not only a choice that you can make, but as a choice the child makes, as I was saying before, I told that story, if we believe that a child chooses us to incarnate through, then it can be seen as a rejection of that child to abort it. But I like to look at it this way. You are an individual soul, and that child is an individual soul. We all collectively are a part of the one mind and soul that is God. But when we are here, we are individual souls. So you both have the power of free will. In order for that soul to come through your body and be born into this world as a baby, I believe, the two of you must make an agreement with each other. And that agreement is a soul-to-soul connection. It's kind of like a marriage. It is indeed a union. They will be sharing your body for 9 months. So both parties need to be equally on board for it to go smoothly, just like a marriage. And I see that little baby soul's desire to come through you as a sort of proposal, which you as the mother can either accept, you can say yes, or you can reject, you can say no. And yes, rejection is hurtful, but think about it in terms of a friendship or a partnership. Again, like I said, on a soul-to-soul level, not on the level of an external God closing or opening your womb. If on a soul-to-soul level you were to ask a friend to do something for you, and they look at you sincerely with love and say, you know, I'd love to help you with that, but at this time, I'm just not able to. You wouldn't be mad at them. Not if you're really good friends. And as I said, not if you share a soul connection. You would understand and graciously move on to someone else who was willing and able to help you. And that's honestly how I view it. The baby's soul just moves on and chooses someone else. Children always forgive more quickly and more easily than we adults do. I don't think any baby ever judges or holds a grudge against a mother who ends a pregnancy. But we do. We judge ourselves and we judge others. And because of that, I think way too many women carry that guilt around unnecessarily. I know there are those who think that women who have abortions are callous or flippant about it, or that they don't hold life as sacred. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe they hold it so sacred that they don't want to attempt to take on the responsibility of it when they know, for whatever reason, that they're not up to the task at this particular time. I have talked to many women who've gone through that experience, and I can guarantee you not one of them has come to that decision lightly or not felt the full weight of the responsibility of that action. In a perfect world, every child would be wanted and planned and loved and taken care of. But this world has not yet been perfected because we as humans have not yet been perfected. Until that time, we'll just have to keep doing the best we can and making the best decisions we can from the highest level of consciousness available to us. So there it is. That's what I think, and you are free to agree or disagree. I want to end by going back to our last quote. I have arrived. I am home in the here and now. I am solid. I am free. In the ultimate, I dwell. In the ultimate, I dwell. That second definition of the word ultimate is the best achievable or imaginable of its kind. In order to have and live the best life imaginable, you have to learn to be the keeper of your whole self, all of it. And you have to take responsibility for both your divinity and your humanity, because you are incomplete without both. When you accept the power you've been given to make choices over your own life, and you say, the buck stops here, I will decide what my journey will be, I will create a life that I love, and I will love myself at every point on that journey, the highs as well as the lows, that is when you will have arrived. That is when you will be home. That is when you will be present in the here and now. You will be solid and free. That is when you will begin to dwell in the ultimate. Amen? I hope you enjoyed that today. It was a tough and difficult subject, but I felt like I needed to share it. So now I have been delivered of it. And please join us tomorrow night. Even though my brother and his family are out of town, we will still be having the Wednesday night teaching series on the gifts of imperfection at 6:30 p.m. And we will not see you in person this Sunday, but please remember to join us virtually for the Sunday service. Be at peace. I love you. Goodbye.